Welcome to episode 7 of 1 minute and 43 seconds, a true Unsolved Mysteries podcast. Today I have my friend and special guest who has joined us before. He's here with us again. Hello, Sohaib.
Hey, Megan. Thanks for having me again.
Thanks for being here. So today we've got a pretty wild case to talk about. It's pretty upsetting, so just a forewarning. Researching this was very depressing. This is the Chicago Tylenol murders. Yeah, not the most Christmassy, festive sort of thing to be talking about, but...
I don't know, Tylenol during Christmas? I feel like everybody needs to bottle if they're going to try to see their family this year.
True. That's true. But in all seriousness, this is a very sad situation here that happened. So, should we just dive right into it?
Sounds good.
All right, so I'm going to start at the beginning with this. So for those of you that don't know, the Tylenol poisonings was something that happened in the 80s in Chicago, the Chicago area. And our story starts on September 29th of 1982. So
way before either one of us was born.
Yeah, I wouldn't say way, but yeah.
No, way.
Okay. So 1982, and it starts with really something that's pretty common, and that's a 12-year-old girl from Schaumburg. Her name was Mary Kellerman. She wakes up, and she's not feeling well. So she goes to her parents and says she's not feeling well, so her father gets her some Tylenol, which is something that, we're all familiar with. You know, you're sick, you wake up, you don't feel good, your parents give you some Tylenol, some cough syrup, whatever, right? So she takes the Tylenol, and her father, Dennis Kellerman, hears her go to the bathroom and then hears a thud. So he goes and knocks on the door, says, "Mary, are you okay?" There's no answer. He keeps calling. He eventually opens up the door and notices Mary lying on the floor, and she's unconscious. So obviously an extremely tragic situation. They call 911. They have paramedics rushed over, and unfortunately within 4 hours, Mary Kellerman was pronounced dead at Alexian Brothers Medical Center in Elk Grove Village. So this was, very tragic for the family, but the poisonings weren't on anybody's radar at this point.
Well, one incident is not a pattern, right?
Right.
It could be anything at that point. I bet they weren't even thinking it was poisoning. It might have been an allergic reaction. People are complaining about that these days with the new vaccines coming out, but these are things that happen. So yeah, one incident is not a case study.
Right.
But there's obviously more.
Right, yeah, and we're going to get to that here pretty quickly, but yeah, so I don't even know if anyone made the connection about the Tylenol at that point. They just, figured she was really ill, obviously, with something, and, so because of the circumstances and her age, she was ordered into the medical examiner's office, so that's going on. They interview the father, and they go into the house and check things out, and everything checks out. What the father said happened was what happened. They did list medication in her file as Tylenol, but everybody, as it says here, according to Chicago Magazine, everybody took Tylenol, everybody in the world, so nobody thought twice about it. We have Adam Janus, a 27-year-old postal worker from Arlington Heights, and he had taken a sick day that day. Because he wasn't feeling well. He felt like he was getting a cold. So he eventually went to pick up his kids from preschool that day and stopped at the Jewel Osco, or the Jewel, to get some Tylenol. So he came home, he had some lunch with his wife, and he let her know, "I'm going to take a few Tylenol and go lay down." So he goes in, he takes some Tylenol, and a few minutes later, he comes back into the kitchen and he's staggering. And then he collapses right away. So we have Thomas Kim, who's the medical director of Northwest Community Hospital's intensive care unit, or he was at the time. And he was saying, their first job is to resuscitate, and they couldn't even do that on Adam Janus. Unfortunately, his heart just would not start again. He is having the unfortunate job of explaining to the family what had happened, but they didn't even know what happened. So they told the family that his wife was there. Teresa is her name. His parents were there, and a bunch of other people that they were related to. So, and this is the really, really sad. This is, of course, all sad, but this is a very sad part of the story. So Adam has been pronounced dead. Instead of going home, his parents, his brother, they all go back to Adam's house with his wife in Arlington Heights, and they're just kind of trying to process what's happening, okay? And unfortunately, because of the grief they were under, Adam Janus, who's now deceased, his brother, Stanley, and his wife, Stanley's wife, decide to take some Tylenol because they have a headache, because they've been kind of through a lot that day. So,
I mean, it's really sad that an entire family got hit. Like 3 members of a single family were killed because, I mean, no one thinks of your everyday Tylenol bottle being the situation. Like, it's a common household item. I know I have one in my house, and I'm pretty sure you have one in your house. Like, it's something that we don't think about, but then everybody's using the same bottle, and if it's tampered with, like, I know we haven't gotten there yet, but the tampering agent was potassium cyanide, which is literally a white powder that can coat a Tylenol pill without looking any different.
Yeah.
So
Stanley, Adam's younger brother, and his wife, Teresa, they took Tylenol, and then one after the other, these 2 people just collapsed. So Charles Kramer, who's a lieutenant with the Arlington Heights Fire Department, he remembers arriving at the house. He remembers there being people everywhere. Obviously, they were there mourning the death of Adam earlier that day. And he says, quote, "All 8 of my men were working, 4 on one man and 4 on a woman. Everything that would happen to the man happened to the woman a few minutes later." So, as you can imagine now, with 3 members of one family succumbing to this poisoning, which they don't know yet, but they now are starting to raise their eyebrows about what's going on. Something's not right.
Let's also remember this is the 80s, and information and misinformation travel much slower. Like, there could have been a massive panic and everybody just taking it out on Johnson & Johnson, who owns Tylenol. Like,
well, that's coming later.
Yeah, but, I mean, this was a slow burn. It wasn't a rapid thing where, I mean, I can't think of a modern equivalent, but, like, I guess today, whenever you hear of a recall of any type, it's pretty much sudden. It's like, boom, we're going to stop using this. We're going to shut this down. It's like pretty instantaneous. And this is also a very common, like, it's a common pain reliever in so many situations. Like, it's...
Yeah, you definitely don't think twice about it.
Yeah.
At least before this. So Dr. Kim, back to him, he's getting ready to leave the office, and a nurse says they were bringing the Janus family back to the hospital. And so Dr. Kim thinks it's probably the parents because they're older. They're probably really devastated by their son's death. But then she says, no, it's his brother. And the brother was healthy. And so Dr. Kim says, well, what happened? Did he faint? And she just says they're working on him right now doing CPR, and they're working on his wife too. So Dr. Kim then realized he's not going anywhere. He won't be going home. He has to stay. He calls Lieutenant of the Fire Department, Chuck Kramer. He realizes something's going on. He realizes they had a death in the morning, and then they had 2 more from the same house. So they want a public health person. And Helen Jensen, so she's a public health nurse. And actually before the 2 members of the Janus family pass away later in the afternoon, there's another victim, and that is Mary Lynn Reiner. She's 27, and she's from Winfield. And she recently gave birth to her 4th child. This is another very tragic story. She gave birth to her 4th child, and this was like a week earlier she had given birth. She's not feeling well, so she takes some Tylenol, and she collapses. And her husband comes home a few minutes later and sees her on the floor, calls an ambulance. She's rushed to the hospital, and she passes away.
One of the things we got to realize is that first responders, their job is to do the most common things to keep you alive. Mm-hmm. And usually that's if you've passed out, CPR. If you're bleeding, patch it up. If you're like having breathing problems, like then they have to give you a respirator. That's what they're trained to do. No one's looking at your blood work right away and seeing that you're poisoned. Unless you can tell them, oh, I just ate this and now I'm having this. You can't make those connections. So these people who were dying in the beginning of all this, like there was no way to pretty much save them, because what was happening is there's just they were poisoned without them knowing it. It's what some people call the perfect assassination weapon, right? Like you sneak poison into somebody's food, they'll eat it. It'll take some time, like depending on the poison, and you have a time delay killing. Yeah. So it's one of those things where, like, unfortunately, the only way to stop this was for them to eventually figure out what was causing it. And that took investigation of, okay, every single one of these people in their timeline said that they took Tylenol. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the only way they figured it out.
Yeah. And actually, so they've got somebody from the medical examiner office investigating this. They've got a public health nurse. They've got Dr. Kim. They've got all sorts of people involved now. But while that's happening, on the same day at 6:30 p.m. at an Illinois Bell store in Lombard, Mary McFarland, a 31-year-old resident of Elmhurst, she tells coworkers she has a bad headache. So she goes into the back room, takes some Tylenol, and within minutes she's collapsed as well. We've got victims piling up here. It's a really bad situation. Meanwhile, the investigators are at the Janus house where the 3 family members, the 3 family members had passed away. And they're looking around, and they at first are kind of lost. So they go to the basement. They find that there's some metal working down there, and they know that like sometimes they use cyanide for polishing, and they wanted to make sure there was nothing in the basement that would have caused that. So eventually, Nurse Jensen, Helen Jensen, she finds a bottle of Tylenol. She notices there are 6 capsules missing and that there are 3 people dead. And so in her mind, she says, this may be what we're dealing with here. And she says at first, like, nobody really took her seriously about this. Nobody gave it a second thought.
Well, because it wasn't on a widespread situation. Like, no one thinks of certain things until you have it in front of you, Like, this wasn't, oh my God, thousands of people are dying across the country because there's tainted Tylenol. This is 3 people have died, and what's the connection? Like, besides the fact that they were in the same family and same house, there could be so many things.
Right.
Like, did they all, like, eat the same leftovers that are just killing everybody? Who knows?
Right. And yeah, they obviously haven't made the connection with the other victims yet.
Right.
But I think the fact that it was the 3 from the same household was what threw up the alarm. Mm-hmm. If it was all these individuals, it might have taken longer. It probably would have. Nurse Jensen is very frustrated because nobody's really giving her any attention when she says I think it's the Tylenol. Dr. Kim is frustrated because he can't figure out what's wrong. And meanwhile, we have another victim, sadly. 9:30 p.m. the same day, 35-year-old flight attendant lands at O'Hare Airport. Her name is Paula Prince. She stops at Walgreens on North Wells Street to buy some Tylenol. And she is later, she lives alone, and I believe she was later found just collapsed in her bathroom or something.
And that's the worst part. Like, if you're poisoned by yourself, no one's going to find you till someone comes looking.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the other part of this, that we know there was a single actor or group of actors that were trying to do this randomly throughout Chicago and the Chicagoland area, because all of these neighborhoods are driving distance from each other.
Mm-hmm.
We know that everyone was going to different pharmacies, getting different bottles of Tylenol. Like, it was extremely random until you start connecting the dots.
Yeah. So one of the investigators takes the Tylenol takes the Tylenol back to the lab. He examines them. He says everything's different about the bottles except they both have the same control number, which is MC2880. And meanwhile, the medical examiner says over the phone, smell them, because cyanide smells like bitter almonds.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I guess like only a certain percentage of the population can smell it.
Yeah, it's a weird one, because it's also what was the other one? It's the same thing where people say about cilantro. It's like it's a genetic disposition to actually like it, or some people think it tastes like soap. So the same thing's true with cyanide. Like those who are either trained to or have the natural ability to smell it, smells like bitter almonds. But if you don't have that, you'll just smell nothing.
Yes, and luckily this person, the investigator, was one of the people that's able to smell cyanide. So that is how they figured it out.
That there was contamination, yeah. So, like, that's another thing of this, is like there was one batch that was returned, like, basically either picked up and returned, or, like, I don't know how they would individually do this in general, but this is also a time where there wasn't a lot of restrictions on over-the-counter drugs.
Yeah, that's true.
So, like, this was Tylenol sitting out there. Like, I don't even know if they had child-proof bottles at that time, but they definitely did not have a seal around it. Like, there was no airtight seal around the top. There was no. They still had the cotton ball in there, because that's the thing that goes back to the 1800s. Back in the 1800s, because pills were made by hand, they were very brittle, and you put them in a bottle, you shake it up, you basically have powder. So they put balls of cotton in there to keep the pills from hitting each other too much. You would still have some pills left over, and these are when I'm talking about tablets, not capsules.
Mm-hmm.
So like capsules, yeah, they have that, like, I guess it's a gel-like coating.
Yeah.
So that keeps them a little safer, but it's still like, I guess, like I don't want to say tradition, but it's like one of those things where if you try to take the cotton ball out of a pill bottle now, like, people wonder what happened, because it's just been there forever. So now it's just a stand-in.
Oh yeah.
So it's interesting how much things have changed, because now you don't need it, because modern pills are made or manufactured in a way where you could shake the bottle up until, like, unless you put it in a blender, they're not going to pulverize. That on top of, like, having a seal on the bottle, child-proof caps, they now come in sealed packaging itself. So there's two-form sealing on the bottles these days, just to make sure that people can't, or because of these cases, people don't tamper with them. It's interesting to see how much changed because of these cases.
Oh yeah, a lot changed for this, because of this. So Dr. Kim gets the results back after doing tests, and yes, the cause of death is cyanide. And so now that they have discovered that this is the cause, they have to do something about the fact that Tylenol is still being sold, obviously. So they decide to have a press conference and warn them that there's going to be a danger. So at first, all they did was say that they found cyanide in Tylenol, and they warned them it's probably not a good idea to take any. They didn't say it should be recalled at first, but they thought it necessary to at least warn the community before any more deaths happen. So
well, obviously, just like any other corporation, Johnson & Johnson had to consider their bottom line. So at first, obviously, they're not going to say no recall because that's a hit of hundreds of millions of dollars because Tylenol is everywhere. At first, they were going to stick to, okay, we think it's Tylenol. People stop using it. Let's figure out what's going on. When it became absolutely certain that, hey, these bottles of Tylenol are being tampered with and we don't know where they are, that's when I think they shut down manufacturing for a while.
Well,
while they figured out how to make it tamper-proof.
Yeah, well, actually, so this press conference I was talking about happened at 10 a.m. the next day. So all of these victims that took it on September 29th, we're talking September 30th, they did their press conference in the morning. And then at 3 p.m. that same day, Johnson & Johnson announced the recall of all Tylenol from lot MC2880. This obviously caused, the release of this information to the public obviously caused a lot of people that, like you said earlier, panic. People were worried that, they had taken Tylenol and they were worried that something was going to happen to them. And the doctor basically said, look, if you're healthy enough or you're conscious and talking to me right now, you're probably fine, but don't take any more Tylenol. So,
and that's the key to this. The poison is pretty quick. Cyanide is one of the more quicker poisoning options. You always hear about it in movies and stuff. It's
terrible.
Yeah, if you're awake and not taking those pills, you're probably not poisoned yet.
Yeah, so I was reading about how cyanide actually works, and it's not pretty. So it's basically a chemical
asphyxiation.
Okay. And so you're able to breathe oxygen into your lungs, but the red blood cells don't take it in.
So you're basically going to suffocate in your own body.
And it happens pretty quick.
Well, it's like a dry drowning almost.
Very cruel. Yeah. Obviously whoever did this, it's a very, very cruel
not
fate
just cruel, but it's also,
on these people.
Especially at the time, it's probably one of the easiest things to obtain. Cyanide is not, or at the time at least, was not a fully controlled substance. People knew that it was bad, but no one was using it for this purpose. You just weren't using it. Now it's a very, very controlled substance.
Yeah. At this time, this is about 5 p.m. the next day, September 30th, they find Paula Prince's body. She's the flight attendant that landed at O'Hare, bought some Tylenol, and then her body's actually discovered the next day. So Monday, October 4th, the mayor, Jane Byrne, passes an ordinance requiring tamper-resistant packaging for all drugs sold in stores. And then the following day, on Tuesday, October 5th, Johnson & Johnson recalls all Tylenol products nationwide, which was 31 million bottles. And an interesting thing I remember reading about this case is that they actually had people going out, law enforcement going out with loudspeakers throughout neighborhoods telling people not to take Tylenol.
The days before text messaging, email, news blasts, and even before CNN.
Yeah.
Because, there wasn't cable news at the time, so I guess people were slightly more informed because, you can trust Dan Rather. But, they still have to do this very person-to-person communication.
Right. Yeah, but I thought that was really interesting, and obviously it was necessary. And
it's crazy to think that 35 years ago that was the best way to get around to talking to people.
Yeah.
Wait. Nope, I rounded down. It's 38 years.
So they have media and patrols using loudspeakers, warning residents not to take their Tylenol. And so now comes the investigation part of this whole thing. So you have 7 people that have died because of this. And since several sources of the Tylenol, different pharmaceutical companies, were tampered with, they were able to rule out manufacturers because the 7 deaths that had occurred were all within the Chicago area. So sabotage during production was actually ruled out, according to.
Right, because a single lot could go to many cities and states.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't a question that this was happening at the Johnson & Johnson level. This was more likely happening at the pharmacy level where, let's remember, this is a time where they didn't have tamper-proof packaging. They didn't consider, how do you control substances, even over-the-counter drugs. They were pretty much on a shelf at a CVS or Walgreens,
mm-hmm.
and people were just picking up bottles and putting them right back if they didn't want them.
Yeah, so another shocking thing about this is I think they recalled all the products. They collected all as many Tylenol bottles as they could. And they set up labs to test the recalled products to see if they could find any more information. And they found, all in all, 8 bottles had been laced with the cyanide. And 5 of those bottles were bottles that the victims had. 2 of the bottles were sent back, thankfully, in the recall. And 1 of the bottles, which is crazy, was actually still on the shelf at a store.
Up until the final recall where they took everything back.
Right.
So the initial
and
recall...
And thank God nobody bought that one.
Yeah. Because there was still a lag between the initial one-day recall to the next nationwide full recall.
Right.
So, yeah. There could have been more victims. Luckily, they caught them all.
Yeah.
Or all the bottles.
Right, yeah. Tragically, though, 7 people did die because of this. And to add to the misery, there were actually hundreds of copycat attacks that resulted from this. And I don't understand this, to be honest with you, because if you're going to do something this heinous and be this cruel, it's like, do you hear about something like this and think, this is a great idea. This is how I could get some attention. Or
it is a mental illness, right?
Yeah, it has to be.
There are crazy people out there who like to copy bad people. You've got just a whole bunch of random people who have done bad things because someone else did bad things, and they want to either emulate or get famous the same way the last guy did.
The thing is, though, the person that did this, they've never been identified. They've never been charged. They've never been named. We have suspects, which we'll go over. Yeah. But so if it's notoriety, I guess part of it is just the fact that you did something and that's what you want. It's just that's the part that gets you your notoriety.
Well, that's if that's the motive. Some people's motive would have been, there was a solid case to be said that maybe the motive is just to drop Johnson & Johnson's price and make a killing in the stock market.
True.
If you bought...
Or a disgruntled employee or something.
A disgruntled employee. Basically, you're hurting... there are ways... You could hurt the company if that's what your goal is, and that's what this would be doing. And yes, it cost 7 people their lives. But... if there's somebody who made a killing off this, it would be in the stock market. You short Johnson & Johnson stock a day before,
mm-hmm.
and then wait for a week after, and their stock is still plummeting. It's yeah.
This might be a stupid question, but is that something they can check for, or is that near impossible to check for?
No, you can check for that, and you can look for that, but it's hard to actually say that that's it. Let's say...
That wouldn't be enough... substantial evidence to
right. You'd have to have a lot of it. You have to be okay, I bought this the day before, and then that, and then there's millions of trades. Even then, there's thousands of trades going on, and plus, in the 80s, there wasn't the internet to do this. If you were trading stock, you were doing it through a brokerage firm. You were calling your broker on the phone, and they were doing your trades for you. So like it would have to be, you'd have to be pretty white collar, like up there, to be on this level. And then there's also nothing to say that this would actually work, because this is the first time, like this is the first major nationwide recall of a product ever. Like before this, if a toy killed you, why are you dying from a toy? Like lawn darts were a great example. Like they didn't recall them, they just made them illegal. But if you bought lawn darts and it turns out, oh shit, you're basically buying throwing knives, you know, they didn't take those back. You paid for it, you get to keep them. The nation made them illegal. In this case, this was a full company-wide recall, or they took all their product back, paid you back your money, or replaced it with new stuff, and that had never happened before.
And I should mention also Johnson & Johnson, they offered to exchange all Tylenol capsules already purchased for like solid tablets. So, and actually I've read that, you know, this case is used in like business courses as an example of how to handle a crisis, because Johnson & Johnson was absolutely applauded for the way that they handled this, despite it costing them, what, $100 million?
$100 million in product, but they rebounded within 6 months. So because of their positive response, because of their handling of the situation, which it also helps that every law enforcement agency absolved them of any wrongdoing from the beginning.
Yeah, because like they were able to rule. Yeah.
If it was a manufacturing thing, like they would not have come back. But this was somebody who, like after the fact, was messing with their product and then causing problems. The company still stepped up. And you see this even today. I think the most recent one I can think of off the top of my head is the Samsung Note in 2014 or 15, where they had the battery that was basically catching on fire.
Oh, I remember that.
And Samsung, same thing. Like, okay, yeah, this is a manufacturing issue. We are not going to split hairs. We are taking them all back, and we will give you brand new phones, like right now. Like, we don't even care. And that's the key. Like, your bad publicity could have hurt them way more than anything else.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'd be scared to death to take any, not just Tylenol. If this happened when I was alive, I would be scared to take not only Tylenol, I wouldn't take any over-the-counter pill. Well, I really wouldn't.
And that's the key, right? You have to, like, it's about reassuring the public. It's about creating that good faith between corporation and consumer. And, I mean, Johnson & Johnson did that with Tylenol, where they took all the old product back, everything. They took all, not just the capsules, they took all Tylenol products back. And they replaced them with tamper-proof packaging.
Correct.
They replaced them, like the capsules, with tablets so that you were slightly more reassured that it wasn't tampered with. And they issued it all within days. Like, they didn't wait too long. Had they dragged their feet, it would have been horrible. But they did this within days in the 80s, which is a rough thing to do. Like, even today, a nationwide recall of anything could still take a week.
And actually, something I didn't know is that this case actually made product tampering a federal crime, which you would think that would, I guess, did people just trust people back then? Like, this was not an issue?
I don't think it was trusting people. I think it was trusting the system. And I think, especially in the latter half of the 20th century, and definitely in the 21st century in America, we have lost a lot of trust when it comes to our institutions and corporations. Like,
trust no one.
Well, yeah, that's what it's become. Because in the past, like, corporations, let's remember, like, boomers were in an age where
Can you explain what that is? Because I hear that all the time. I don't know what that means.
Boomers are people born during the the baby boomer population, born between 1950 to 70, I believe.
Okay. I
think I have the dates right. But the point is, like, these guys were grew up in an age where you got one job in a corporation, you stayed there for your life, you retired with a pension, and you were set.
Yeah.
Like, there was your life. There's your next 40 years. Today, we don't even have that because every corporation is looking for their bottom dollar, and the average employee only lasts 2 years at a job because there's a lot of turnover. There's lack of trust. You don't trust your employer to have your best interest. You're basically looking for the next big paycheck and your next opportunity because it may not be at the same place. So, yeah, at this time there was a lot of trust in product and corporations, and we've lost that over time.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense. Do you want to talk about suspects?
Yeah.
So, as we said before, they ruled out any tampering at the manufacturing level. And another interesting fact about this is, I guess, so eventually somebody would have had to put the cyanide inside these capsules. And I guess, like, if too much time passed, that it would kind of eat through
the
capsules
capsules are not designed to hold cyanide. Cyanide would actually...
Well, no, yeah,
well,
that's
potassium
true.
cyanide, like, it's got two pieces to it. Potassium being the heavy metal would actually eat through the capsule part of it. So, yeah, whoever did this had to do it within days of people buying it.
Right, so they're theorizing, like, somebody must have purchased these and laced them, somewhere else with the cyanide and then brought them back and put them on shelves.
Right, and that's the key. Like, whatever happened, it would have to be someone taking these bottles, going somewhere else to actually put in the potassium.
Right.
Cyanide, because that's, like, you can't just do that in a store. They had to go in and open these capsules and replace the medicine with cyanide.
Yeah.
Put the capsule back together, put it back in the bottle, seal the package, outside package, and then put it right back on the shelf. I would think they wouldn't be stupid enough to use a credit card to buy this stuff. Even then, like, you've got millions of people buying Tylenol, so it's probably not the best way to track them.
Right.
And in the 80s, you didn't have a lot of cameras.
Nobody saw this coming.
Well, you also didn't have
True.
a lot of cameras. So, like, if there was a camera, it was pointed only at the cash register. Because in the 80s, credit cards were less used. You had a lot more trust in what's happening in terms of your product, and there wasn't all the same digital tracking. Like, sure, you had UPC codes to scan product, but there wasn't all this, like, super high-end digital tracking of every single bottle. Like, you could have somebody could have easily taken them home, did the deed, brought them back,
Right.
put them back on the shelf, no one would know.
And nobody would have even batted an eye.
And they would put them right in the front so that they'd be the next one taken. Like, you don't think of that, but the first one you take, that's it.
But yeah, so I'm just going to dive in real quick to some suspects. So one thing we should mention is this guy that sent a letter to Johnson & Johnson demanding $1 million to stop the poisoning, and his name was James William Lewis. He was identified with fingerprints that he left on the envelope, and police were not able to link him with the crimes. He was living in New York, but he was convicted of extortion.
Well, because they did track him to the fact that he sent that letter to...
Correct, yes. So he did send this letter. They couldn't link him to the crimes, and I guess he ended up denying them anyway. And it just turned out this guy was just trying to get a paycheck, I guess.
I mean, that's part of the copycats, right? Like, it's one of those things where these guys who... like, they see the opportunity, and if no one else is taking advantage of it, why not be the one to say, hey, I'll stop it if you pay me $1 million, because, after the fact. But the problem with ransoms is you get caught. Like, if you're actually going to get paid, the only way to pay you is to know who you are, and it's done.
I never understood that, to be honest. Like, the people that are like, drop off the money at XYZ location and don't tell the cops. It's like, somebody has to go pick that money up.
Well, they usually have stand-ins.
All they have to do is surveil you from secrecy, and Done.
And that's usually how people get caught, which is why that never works. It never works because people get caught in getting your money. Even if you're using untraceable currencies like Bitcoin, there's always a trail. There's always somewhere to find you. Like, governments and corporations have learned how to track stuff. Like, it might be semi-anonymous, but at the end of the day, you're still going to have to collect your money somewhere because you can't use Bitcoin as Bitcoin. It has to be used for material or trade goods, which is how people get caught.
Yeah. Moving to our next suspect, there was a dock worker named Roger Arnold. I guess he was an employee, or he worked at the Jewel where one of the poisoned bottles was found. And he was at a bar one night, and he was making some suspicious comments about the Tylenol poisonings. And I don't know exactly what was said, but I just know that it was suspicious. He was eventually looked at by police. They questioned him. They searched his home. They found a few things that were a little weird there, like how to commit a crime or some kind of book like that.
I love how, like, a dude bragging at a bar is a suspect.
Well, we don't know what he said, like if he bragged about it or all I could find was that he made like
that's not evidence.
I know it's not evidence, but he apparently, but get this, the plot is going to thicken here in a second. He actually blamed somebody named Marty Sinclair, who was the owner of the bar that he was at. He blamed this guy he thought this guy turned him into police because of whatever comments he was making. So he actually shot and killed somebody who he thought was this guy. This guy that he killed was named John Stanisha. This was a guy that wasn't related to any of this case at all. He mistook him for the bar owner.
Dear God.
Shot and killed him and served 15 years in prison. And he actually just... he died, I don't know why I say he just died, but he died in 2008. It seems like that was just yesterday, doesn't it?
No. But it's sad that people take the law into their own hands like that. It's just... That's how you make mistakes. That's not justice. That was pure vigilantism.
You're right.
Vengeance. Not even vengeance. Just pure vigilantism.
All because he thought this guy reported him to the police, but it wasn't even the right guy.
Not just that. It's like, yeah, this all started with a whole bunch of misunderstandings. It's like, okay, if you're going to report somebody to the police, you better have some evidence, like false reports. And this is actually a huge
Nobody
thing.
knows who reported this guy, but yeah, you're right.
But false reports, like apparently, they could end your career in a lot of cases.
But come on, like we don't know what he said at this bar. What if he did say some pretty incriminating things?
No, but we don't know what he said at this bar, right?
But if you were at a bar and you overheard something like this, like something big going on in the news like this, if you were alive during this time and you heard somebody say something, just again, we don't know what he said, but
that's the problem. We don't know what he said. So
maybe he said something.
If I overheard somebody talking about a crime, right, and I was 100% sure about the crime, I would first look into getting corroborating information. Hey,
you wouldn't say...
Okay, let's say he was sitting at the bar. I would go to the bartender. Hey, I just heard him say this. Did you hear that? I would figure out... And
if you're the only one that heard it, you're telling me you wouldn't report it?
If I'm the only one that heard it, I would actually consider benefit of the doubt before I start reporting people to the cops.
No way,
yes,
man.
I swear.
I disagree with you.
God, because here's the thing. Reporting someone to the cops is essentially... it basically starts the trial.
But it's not like they're going to get arrested.
No, it is exactly that. They are going to get arrested. Like, if you are a minority person in America and you get accused of something, you're pretty much guilty until proven innocent, and that's a problem.
Well, I don't think this guy was a minority, but yes, I get what you're saying.
But that's a problem in the way the justice system works, and on top of that, it's a problem of how everything works.
But what if Sohaib, this man, let's say you heard this man saying something suspicious about these crimes in a bar. Isn't it... No, let me just finish this question.
Unless he said, I did this and I killed these people and ha, 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 ha.
Can I just quit?
and I have that on recording,
let me just finish.
Then it's my word against his, and I don't think that's enough to even go to the cops.
Okay, but let me just finish the question.
Yeah.
Let's say you hear a guy say something suspicious, maybe not to that extent, but something really kind of sketchy. Your reporting it or not reporting it could mean a matter of life or death for someone else if this person is still doing it. You know what I'm saying? Now, no. Let me finish. I'm just saying, isn't it better to have the cops look into it than not say anything and then be sorry the next day? Because there are so many of these cases that I've researched, Sohaib, where there's been a witness, there's been somebody that saw something suspicious and they didn't think much of it, and then something else happened, and then by then it's too late.
To quote Captain America, every time someone tries to stop bad things from happening, good people get hurt. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because what's going to happen is, you might be right, but you're equally likely to be wrong unless you have proof. Okay? Unless it's something like, hey, I'm going to go kill that guy right there, or I'm going to blow up some building, that's different. And, there's usually a lot more to it. But some guy, a couple months after the incidents have happened, is bragging about doing something.
We don't know if he was bragging.
We don't even know what he was saying. That's the problem.
Yeah. No, that's right.
We have no context, but someone did report this guy to the police.
He must have said something that concerned someone.
Well, what'd he say?
It's not reported.
Well, that's the problem. If there's no report, that means it wasn't enough to report.
No, not necessarily. The cops could have been keeping the cops probably knew exactly what he said.
Well, then they just didn't.
Why?
It's been long enough. Why are there still secrets? That's the other problem with all this. Why so much secrecy around all this? If you have valid evidence, let it out. The trials are over. Most of the people involved in this thing are dead anyway. Might as well release it all and just call it. But to that point,
I'm not saying it's not evidence.
Unless you have absolute proof that someone is going to commit a crime, that is the only time you start talking to the police. The insinuation of a crime is sometimes enough to cause a cataclysmic event to hurt people.
Maybe.
Let's put it this way, and there's a lot of situations like Van Jones, CNN reporter. This was during the George Floyd incidents. Once said, as a black man, my life would be over if a woman even accused me of a crime, because I would be in police custody. I would have an arrest record. I would have to fight tooth and nail to prove my innocence. That is definitely not true of white America, where you get accused of a crime, there is an automatic level of doubt before there's justice. On top of that, there's also the fact that in our system, anytime you're arrested, you have to report it.
Just because this guy's questioned doesn't mean he's going to get arrested. Was he even arrested? I should look.
Yes, he was arrested. That's the problem. So now his financial life is over.
No, it says he was identified, investigated, and cleared of the killings. But I don't know. Maybe he was arrested, and it just
maybe arrested, and then you still got to get that expunged.
He said no. This is to your point. This guy Roger Arnold that we're talking about, he had a nervous breakdown due to media attention.
So
that goes along with what you're saying.
It's all part of it, and even if he was just investigated, that means that they're going to talk to his employer. His employer could be like, hey, we don't want this detention. We got to let you go.
True.
They're going to talk to his family and friends. Oh, my God, what the hell did he do? The investigations can ruin your life.
True.
And false accusations have the same power. The problem is when people start taking the law into their own hands. Hey, I overheard this. I don't remember exactly what he said.
But that's not taking the law into your own hands. That's reporting it so they can deal with it how they want to deal with it.
So what gives them... Why do they have to report it? More importantly, if you're going to report something, you had better be damn sure...
Why do they have to report it?
No, why report something that's only hearsay?
Well, we don't know exactly, what he said.
Exactly. We don't know what he said. I'm assuming he didn't hear enough.
Suspicious, I would definitely report it. And it depends on what they said. If they're just talking... crap.
Smack, yeah.
If they're just talking crap, saying who knows? But like, if they're saying stuff,
if he's like, oh man, those people got what they deserve. Now it's all this. Like, yeah,
well, that I wouldn't report because that's just some guy.
Unless he said, hey, you know what happened last month? That was all me. I did that. I killed these 7 people. Ha 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 ha. Unless that's what you heard, and you're willing to stand up in court and say that's what you heard, then that's the only way you report this stuff. If it was like, oh, he was talking about stuff and it sounded pretty suspicious, that's not enough.
It's not enough to convict somebody, but it's
not enough to report.
It's worth looking into, I think.
No, it's not, because you've got copycats everywhere. You've got
that's true,
insane people who decide to take credit for stuff.
Well, these aren't people that shouldn't be looked into. If they're still, even if they're copycats, they should be looked into.
No, copycats should be looked into, of course. But you need substantial evidence to start looking into people. You can't just start opening the books and be like, oh, that guy was at a bar drinking and then he said these things.
No, so you need substantial evidence.
You need evidence.
You need evidence. Okay, fine. You need evidence to convict somebody in a court, but you don't need to know for 100% certain to say, hey, I think this sounded a little bit fishy. You might want to look into this guy. You know, it could be nothing, but
no,
I just want to make sure.
Because our justice system doesn't have a benefit of the doubt. There's no benefits to anybody to be looked into. There is just...
That's not true, because this guy was cleared.
This guy was cleared, but...
Because they couldn't link him to it.
But he had a nervous breakdown. No one cared about him afterwards.
Who says no one cared about him?
The system didn't care about him because the system doesn't care. And then on top of that...
Well, he actually shot and killed this guy that he thought turned him in.
Right. So
but it was mistaken identity.
In this whole thing, you've created a new criminal.
I mean, you could look at it that way, or you could look at it like...
investigating him and doing what they did to his life. I don't know what they did. Did he lose his job because of the investigation? That doesn't say there. Like, what we're reading, we don't know, but did he lose his job?
I will look more into it and I'll put an update on the podcast, because I would be curious to see what happened to this guy. I know he passed away in 2008, but... No, yeah, I will look into it. So
there's a lot to it, and that's the problem. Like, hearsay and reporting are very different. And today... Like, you know, to anybody's point, if you're ever questioned, first words is, get me a lawyer. That is the first words anybody should ever say before talking to anybody of authority. Because screw makes you look guilty, you know? That crap is basically a way for cops to...
But that's how you solve crimes in one sense.
No, that's how you can... report solving crimes, but that's not actually how you solve crimes.
No, but Sohaib, like, if somebody doesn't come forward and there's vital information, like, I'm not saying this was vital information. It could have been complete bull.
Exactly, that's the problem. It
could have.
Yeah.
I'm saying,
and it sounds like it wasn't vital because they didn't have anything to stick. So the guy who reported it was basically reporting hearsay.
But if
it was vital, there would have been enough to convict him.
I guess we just disagree on this, because if I heard something that I thought sounded not right, and there was something like this going on where innocent people were being killed... It
comes down to your judgment call, and...
Right.
But you got to make the right judgment call. This guy, apparently, whatever was reported was enough to cause an investigation, but not enough to get this guy...
So there you go.
But not enough to get this guy caught and convicted. And more importantly, investigations are what can ruin your life.
But...
because they'll go after you. They are going to rip your life apart, and they're not going to care about putting it back together afterwards.
So let me give you a hypothetical. So there's like a guy, let's say there's a guy on the
hypotheticals are always BS, because you can make a hypothetical for anything.
But hear me out. This was in college. This happened. There was a guy that was playing with a knife on a train, and he was yelling aggressively at people. And I think it was one of our friends, I won't name them, told the conductor that there's a guy with a knife.
Well, that's different.
He didn't technically stab anybody, but does that mean we shouldn't have said anything?
But that's a weapon in public. That's totally different.
All right, you're right.
Had the guy been like...
that was different.
Hang on. Had the guy on the train just been like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take it. I'm going to... Just like ranting like crazy. I've seen that on CTA all the time. But I report those guys because it's on the CTA and they're not...
You don't report that?
No, because they're just sitting there in the corner just ranting, and that's not a big deal because I don't know what's going on there. Dude had a knife out, I would have reported it.
But that's not a chance I'd be willing to take. I mean, if
because if you're going to report everybody that's ranting crazy on the CTA,
CPD
will have nothing else to do.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying if we're just talking about this case, let's say if I'm at a bar and I hear if I'm at a bar and if I'm in 1982 and I hear somebody talking, again, we don't know what he said. We don't know if he confessed or if he said he did something. If he confessed,
fine. That's reported.
No. But if he said something that made me think, like, I can't give you a specific example, but if he said, okay, I could.
Because there's only two things that he could have said.
There's
either some bullshit about the case where it's like, oh my god, you're talking about the case? Uh-oh. Or he legitimately said facts and figures that make you think that he did something wrong. In which case...
If it's an ongoing investigation and there are people in the public that are literally dead because of this, yeah, I would say something to the police. And I'm not trying to crucify anyone. I think everyone deserves a fair trial. But, like, if you're saying something suspicious that sounds not right to me...
Unless it's a confession, it's not reportable.
But it is... it's reportable. It doesn't mean he's going to pay for these crimes.
I mean, what would he have been said?
Check him out. If he's fine, then he's fine. Like they did. They checked him out. They didn't.
But the problem in checking him out was the fact that it caused him all this pain and suffering, and there's no.
Well, maybe he shouldn't have been running his mouth at the bar.
He confessed. That's like, or literally said that, hey, guess what I did? You're at a bar. You're drinking. He's probably not saying it, like, if that's what happened, like, they investigated him because he was reported, but if he wasn't on their radar to begin with, he probably wasn't going to be on their radar until someone called him out.
Can I say something else, though? Yeah. He does have a connection, though. He worked at one of the stores where the
So wouldn't they have been investigating everybody at the stores? Because they said that they investigated store employees, former employees. They also investigated, like, employees of Johnson & Johnson and the pharmacies. Like, they investigated all these guys. But apparently this one guy who had a special report on him from a bartender got a little more attention than the rest.
Okay, so if, like, let's say you had a really expensive, like, set of headphones, and there's, like, 5 people that are here at my place, and we're all, like, we're chatting, and, like, you get distracted, the headphones are gone. And then I overhear somebody, like, I hear Dave saying, like, oh, man, those headphones that Sohaib has are so awesome. I've been wanting some of those, blah, blah, blah. And are you telling me that guy is not worth more of an investigation than somebody else that's here? I mean, come on, man.
I'm exactly saying that, because if he's
that ain't right.
Well, if he's
it goes against logic to me.
No, it doesn't go against logic.
To me, it does.
That's, like, complimenting or talking about a situation is not the same as being involved in a situation. Okay?
Well, again, we don't know what this guy said, but yes.
Yes, so unless he said that he did it, then he wasn't reportable. Everything else was in the news. Everything else was pretty much public information. And if he was an employee, he was already in the big pool of investigation that they were supposed to do. But because somebody, like, decided to speak up...
But that's valuable information for somebody in law enforcement.
It's not. It's basically a way to single somebody out in law enforcement because they need something. Law enforcement needs a reason, right? Yeah. So if he was just a big pool of people that was former employees at whatever pharmacy location, he would have been overlooked because there's not enough to do anything on him. But if somebody says, oh, that guy said something, now you've got a single finger pointing at another one person, you can focus in. Yeah. Investigations die because they don't have enough to actually narrow stuff down. But sometimes that's a good thing, because what we're learning now, especially from this case, is it most likely was a single actor or a group of actors that were doing this, in my opinion, to mess with Johnson & Johnson's stock price.
You're talking about the actual criminals.
The actual criminals, yes.
Or the criminal. Do you think it was more than one person?
I could have been more than one person. Who knows? Like, that's one way to keep it, like... They did it in multiple cities throughout the Chicagoland area, right? So it could have been as easy as one person going to all these pharmacies, not impossible.
Right.
It could have been a group being like, hey, I've got this great idea to make a bunch of money. Let's short Johnson & Johnson stock, let's tamper with Tylenol, and people start dying, but hey, it'll drop the price.
You got to be a real diabolical human being for that
you do. And I think they've made a whole bunch of movies about that in Hollywood. But the point is, like, unless... The reason this one person was pointed out is probably, like, wasn't enough to actually give like a real conviction, but it was enough to ruin his life.
We don't know that for a fact.
We do.
Well, it sounds like
because he said the media attention caused him to have a nervous break, and then he killed somebody.
You're right. I'm sorry.
So
I mean, I'll give it to you. If this guy, there's no proof he was involved.
Well,
it sounds
there's
like
proof that he wasn't involved because the investigation cleared him.
No, that doesn't mean there's proof he wasn't involved. It means there's no proof he was involved, which is you're innocent until proven guilty.
But that goes against our system, right? You're innocent until proven guilty, but they're going to spend all their time trying to figure out how to prove you guilty.
I mean, I get what you're saying.
Right.
But at the same time, like, I listen to a lot of these cases, and one of the main things that I hear in these cases is, like, people saying, the police saying, if you've seen anything, if you've heard anything, even if you think it's insignificant, come forward because it could help us.
Because they need probable cause. But the problem is giving probable cause. Probable cause can be as simple as this guy mentioned it. That's the problem. Like, probable cause is such a vague term that it comes down to people making judgment calls. And if you make bad judgment calls, you're going to ruin people's lives.
Okay, regardless of who committed these heinous crimes, it's definitely evident that this is something that destroyed a lot of people. And, you know, if Roger Arnold was innocent, which, I mean, there was no evidence that showed he was guilty, it's a tragedy for him as well and his family. So
yeah, I mean, the initial case hit 5 different families, but at the end, there's a lot of pain to go around because that's another part of unsolved and senseless crime, where if there's no real purpose and there's no finality to it, it leaves it very open-ended. Like, we've got 5 families who are now at the end of this 2-day ridiculousness that are never going to be whole again.
Yeah. Before we sign off, I just wanted to mention and kind of pay tribute to the victims. There was 12-year-old Mary Kellerman. She was a 7th grader at Adams Junior High School in Schaumburg. If she were alive today, she would be 50 years old today in 2020. So obviously a life that was taken way too soon. She's currently buried at St. Michael the Archangel Catholic Cemetery. Adam Janus, he was a postal worker. He was the father of 2 young children. He was living in Arlington Heights. Again, that's another tragic situation. His brother and sister-in-law, they were the ones that also passed away the same day as him. Paula Prince, she was the flight attendant. She worked for United Airlines. On the day of her death, she flew from Las Vegas to O'Hare International Airport, and then she was discovered the next day. Mary Reiner, she was married to her husband, Ed. They had just given birth to their 4th child, and she used Tylenol to relieve her post-birth discomfort. And then finally, there's Mary McFarland. She was working at her job at Illinois Bell and Lombard when she felt the bad headache coming on. She had a family as well. She had siblings. She had children. So all around, this is a very, very tragic situation. All of these people should still be with us today. Do you have anything else to add? I don't know.
No, I mean, this is a case of senseless mass murder. Unfortunately, we don't know who actually did it or why. I mean, we can make all these speculations, and there's all these people who were considered part of it, but honestly, like, there wasn't, like, this, the only good thing that came out of this is better standards for over-the-counter drugs and better tampering measures on most harmful, or anything that could be harmful when it comes to packaging, because that was a big deal. But other than that, I mean, this was just a whole bunch of senseless murder, and, you know, you hate seeing it, but unfortunately it's part of the reality we have to live with.
Absolutely, yeah. So when you next go to open your next package of Tylenol and you are fighting through the seals and the tamper-resistant stuff that they have on there. This is the case that prompted all that. This is the case that inspired that. And so we just, rest in peace to all the victims. And it's unlikely they're going to find out who did this. It's been so long, but victims, rest in peace. But yeah, that's all I have. And thank you for tuning in. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks for
again,
having me,
Sohaib.
Megan.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to episode 7 of 1 minute and 43 seconds, a true Unsolved Mysteries podcast. If you are interested in more information, please check out our website, 143mysteries.com, and follow us on Instagram at 143mysteries. Thank you for listening. This podcast has been approved by Skipper the Cat. Right, Skippy?